Welcome to today's update video titled Babylon's Traps. Last warning to flee. Today we will tie together at least two loose threads, and through that we will gain even more evidence for the coming of our Lord and Savior. On the one hand, we will look at a verse in Revelation 18 that has been neglected until now, and then we will take another look at the grape harvest of Revelation 14, but not because the last interpretation in the video, the harvest at the end of time, was wrong, but quite the opposite. The time segments assumed there will today be backed and confirmed with exact dates. You will be astonished. So, it will be exciting again. Please stay with us. Let's look right away at the last three videos. I especially want to point to this most recently published video titled The Proclamation of the Day and the Hour, because it actually contains, for Christians, the answer to what is probably the most important question. How long, O Lord? At least this question was important for Daniel. Today, almost no one wants to hear anything when someone announces the time of the Lord's return, because no one knows the time, except the Father. And what if He has finally made the day and hour known? How did the Father do that? Where did He do it? In what language? And are there at least 2 or 3 witnesses for it? And why didn't He announce it in your church? Well, if that has stirred your curiosity, then this video is perfect for you. God promised that He reveals everything He intends to do to His servants, the prophets, beforehand. Amos 3:7. And which prophet of the Old Testament was also promised by God to appear once more shortly before the return of Jesus? Mega video. Absolutely watch it. The next to last video, The Forgotten Feasts by Brother John, shows what the DNA of a true Christian must look like. Brother John summarized how this DNA was found, what it means for every individual, when the DNA sequence was completed, and how it can be replicated in every Christian. A must-watch video to examine one's own foundation of faith before it is too late. And in this third-to-last video, the sign of the Son of Man, we looked at Three-Eye Atlas during 3 time periods, from the appearance until the disappearance behind the sun as the cast censer. Then the segment behind the sun, especially its superposition at the beginning of the second hour of the fall of Babylon, with Earth, Sun, and Moon on October 21st, and the perihelion on October 29. And we examined the current time segment, when Three-Eye Atlas is observable again, especially when all telescopes on Earth will be pointed at it for a special reason starting November 27. The quietly published decision for this was also issued on October 21. And with that, soon everyone on this earth should recognize that the King of Kings has indeed arrived, and thus understand that Three-Eye Atlas is the sign of the Son of Man. The second topic in this video is a detailed look at the timelines of the 2 witnesses, but from the perspective of the cross olive tree witness at the solstice points at Sagittarius, a star, in Sagittarius. This look gives us detailed data for the next few weeks until our very important dates in December 2025 and a little bit beyond. We learned that the 1335 days ended with a special blessing on October 20 to 21. So on the same day, when it became known that Three-Eye Atlas posed a massive threat to the Earth and to us humans, and that it must be examined under all telescopes. You're missing something if you haven't watched these videos so far. Please catch up quickly. You will not get this information anywhere else. In the last videos, we have already recognized that the 3 hours of the fall of Babylon must be a kind of countdown to the third culminating hour, which began around November 20. There is a verse in Revelation 18 that we have so far only considered a little. Let's read it first. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Well, it should be known that the revelation was shown to the Apostle John in vision in the firmament. We, as High Sabbath Adventists, are very eager to see the texts of Revelation fulfilled in the firmament. According to this verse, we would therefore have to find a woman sitting on a throne who is not a widow, meaning that her husband should also be present. She must also see something, namely, no sorrow, and she would represent this harlot Babylon. In fact, the kings and merchants and captains and shipmasters all lament the smoke of the burning of the great harlot Babylon, most likely in the last culminating hour. That is what we want to see. We want Babylon, meaning the enemy, this harlot queen, to fall, because otherwise Jesus cannot and will not come. This prophecy must be fulfilled first. Who is this queen in the Protestant sense? It is the Catholic Church, which has now rebuilt its religious and political kingdom under Pope Francis, as we have shown in one of the last videos. The dot on the I is the current American Pope, Leo XIV. The seemingly deadly wound is healed. We will learn more about this at the end of the video. We saw Pope Francis speaking before the United Nations, and even before the chambers of the United States. We saw a Pope before the 10 horns of the European Union. Everyone knows that the seat of the Catholic Church is the Vatican, a small city-state in Rome as the seat of this harlot. And Rome is in Italy, and Italy is in Europe. So if one wants to see the harlot Babylon burn, as Revelation 17 says, then one would have to at least see Rome, the Vatican, burning in some form. Now I have spoken badly about the Vatican as the seat of the harlot Babylon, and many are probably outraged. But here are 2 biblical proofs that Rome is meant. Do you know the history of Rome? Did you like this subject in school? Here is a historical fact in the Bible. Let's read. And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. This mighty fourth angel represents a special successor church that went out from the church of the Seventh-day Adventists, who stand for the third angel in Revelation 14. And why this fourth angel is called High Sabbath Adventists is something Brother John summarized impressively in the video, The Forgotten Feasts. In this video, you can learn quite a lot about the work and activity of this special church at the end of time. This fourth angel is the one who testifies that Babylon has fallen twice. This image testifies of the first fall of Babylon. Do you know what is meant? It is not the ancient Babylon, but Rome. Let's read. In AD 64, a massive fire devastated large parts of the city of Rome. Many ancient sources, especially Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, report that Emperor Nero either ordered the fire himself or at least allowed it to happen deliberately. His goal was apparently to create space for a new, magnificent city built according to his own artistic and architectural ideals. At the center of this new Rome, he planned to erect his immense palace, the Domus Aurea, Golden House, a symbol of his power and divine pretensions. But Nero's motives were not driven only by vanity and ambition. At that time, Rome was an overcrowded, chaotic, and often decaying city, filled with narrow alleys and wooden houses that constantly posed a fire hazard. Many districts were considered breeding grounds of filth, disease, and social scum. Nero saw the fire as an opportunity to purge these slums and rebuild the city according to his vision. Clean, orderly, and grand, with wide streets, stone buildings, and symmetrical layouts. However, when the people turned against him and accused him of starting the fire, Nero shifted the blame to the Christians, claiming they were responsible. This marked the beginning of the first great persecution of Christians in Roman history. In truth, the fire became a tool of political and social control, allowing Nero both to realize his building ambitions and to strengthen his power, an attempt to replace the old chaos with his self-styled divine order. That is the first burning of Rome. That is the first fall of Rome. And in Revelation 18, we read that Rome falls a second time. Yes, even burns, as Revelation 17 testifies. But I know everything in many of the viewers still resists when someone says the Vatican in Rome is the harlot Babylon, even though the Bible says it falls twice. Just listen closely to what the first chief apostle Peter says about Babylon. And when you look at the next slide, then consider what the real Peter says about the place where the supposedly holy fathers sit on the chair of Peter. What mockery! You will see in a moment. Peter ends his first letter as follows: By Silvanus, a faithful brother unto you, as I suppose, I have written briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God wherein ye stand. The church that is at Babylon elected together with you, saluteth you, and so doth Marcus my son. Greet ye one another with a kiss of charity. Peace be with you all that are in Christ Jesus. Amen. In Ellicott's Bible commentary, and of course in many others, it says with regard to this mention of Babylon, that is at Babylon. 3 places have claimed to be understood under this name. 1, a little place called Babylon in Egypt. Read it for yourselves. 2, the literal Babylon in the east. Read it at your leisure. 3, it may be called the established interpretation that the place meant is Rome. We never hear of St. Peter being in the east, and the thing in itself is improbable, whereas nothing but Protestant prejudice can stand against the historical evidence that St. Peter sojourned and died at Rome. Whatever theological consequences may flow from it, it is as certain that St. Peter was at Rome as that St. John was at Ephesus. Everything in the letter also points to such a state of things as was to be found at Rome about the date when we believe the letter to have been written. You can keep reading. Further down it says, and it seems pretty clear that the name was quite intelligible to Jewish readers, for whom it was intended. The Apocalypse, Revelation 17:18, is not the only place where Rome is found spoken of under this title. One of the first of living Hebraists told the present writer that no Hebrew of St. Peter's day would have had need to think twice what city was meant when Babylon was mentioned. And on the mention of the name, all the prophecies of the vengeance to be taken on the city which had desolated the Holy Land would rush with consolation to the mind of the readers, and so on and so forth. Take your time reading this section, or follow the link. One thing is clear. Peter himself called Rome Babylon. There is no doubt about that. And every loyal and kind-hearted Catholic should finally wake up and flee from Babylon and from that very church, as we read in Revelation 18, so that their plagues do not come upon these dear but so deceived followers of Rome. Please take it as a final warning. And this Bible commentary even connects Revelation 17, verse 18, with Rome, for that is where the harlot sits and will be burned by the 10 horns, as we repeatedly point out in our videos. At some point, the deception that comes from Rome will come to light. However, too late to belong to the wise virgins. I sincerely hope that at the latest now it is clear what is meant by Babylon. So where do we find this seated queen in the firmament? Here she is. And it even says here, seated queen. It is the constellation Cassiopeia. And the former Egyptian queen Cassiopeia was known for her vanity and her pride. That is why she is also depicted looking into the mirror. And she convinces herself, I will see no sorrow. And here is the king, her husband as the constellation Cephas. And the king is necessary because according to the text, she is not a widow. He looks quite alive, I think. Here is the North Pole of the firmament, and both sit at the side of the dragon, who, according to Isaiah 14, wants to sit in the far north on the Mount of Assembly. This queen reminds one of a fairy tale where it says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" I am the queen. No one else rules over me. And who else says that about himself? Satan, the once so beautiful light bearer who did not want anyone to rule over him. And sorrow comes when someone dies, but she does not want to grow old, even wants to be immortal and remain beautiful forever. Former names of the Queen of Heaven in the various cultures include Ishtar, Astarte, Asherah, Isis, Hera, just to name a few. And who then is, sadly for many deceived Christians, the current Queen of Heaven? Mary, of course. And behind these names stands only one, Satan. He was and always is Satan, only worshipped and adored under different names. As long as she sits so peacefully in the far north, no sorrow comes. But the day will come when her sorrow will indeed come, because she, as a picture of the harlot Babylon, lived so gloriously and luxuriously. Let's read the next verse. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. So the burning of Babylon will not come in the first 2 hours of her fall, but we must also consider the one day. Remember, we have already recognized that the 3 hours of the fall of Babylon are to be seen as a countdown toward the culminating 3rd hour. Until now, we understood that these 3 hours of the fall of Babylon stand for 3 moon cycles within the 70th Jubilee, and that remains so. But we can ask ourselves whether there is also a specific literal day in the culminating 3rd hour of the fall of Babylon, from November 20 onward. What would we need to show us something like this? What would we need so that this Bible verse and this constellation would even be activated? Of course, a heavenly actor. But since the Queen is very far from the ecliptic, the classic wandering stars of the Mazzaroth cannot serve as actors. So we need a comet that God sends at the right time to indicate a verse anywhere in the entire starry sky. And because we understand the time when this verse has to unfold in the end time events, and also where, we can quite easily find out which comet reflects or activates this story in the Bible. For completeness, let's read here in Isaiah 14 a short biography of Lucifer, or Satan. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Just as we have the divine Trinity in the 3 distinct persons of the Father, the Son, and also the distinct person of the Holy Spirit, so Satan also has his Trinity. And here you see them depicted. the dragon, the would-be king, and the female would-be queen of heaven. Where does Satan go? We have read it. Into the sides of the pit. Or, as it says in Revelation 20, into the bottomless pit. We will still come to what, where, and when that will be. Which comet now activates this queen, so that we know when her day of sorrow will begin? Does this path look familiar to you? First, look here below. Here we have C2025K1, which we already used in our last videos when we introduced the call to the supper of the birds on October 8 to 10. Do you remember? In this video, we will see whether it was this angel at perihelion or whether there is another, better actor for this call. And we also said that this comet K1 does not represent anything good, because it even comes from the serpent bearer and the serpent. And now the path goes directly toward the Queen of Heaven. And in the region of Andromeda, it then remains and makes loops as if tying a button or knot into a string. And in the middle of the entire path is the dragon in his trinity, as if he were enclosed and tied shut at the top. Well, I think you see and understand the picture that I want to point you toward. But let's go through it step by step. If we zoom in around the Queen of Heaven, we then see when she and her day of sorrow is activated. Look here at the right picture. It is December 1, 2025, when K1 activates this constellation. And that is exactly the day we found in one of the last videos, when Three-Eye Atlas, as the spirit of life from God, enters the candlestick point in Virgo. And at the same time, the constellation of Pisces stands on its feet. Please be sure to watch the video, The Sign of the Son of Man. Remember, from November 27, all telescopes are pointed at Three-Eye Atlas. So it is quite possible that on or at least from December 1, one could begin to recognize who is arriving with Three-Eye Atlas. So this December 1 is the first day when the verse that the Queen is still without sorrow is activated. So here begins her countdown to the moment when her worry-free life will be over. The fall of Babylon is certainly also connected to when people recognize that it is Jesus who is coming in the clouds, and they can no longer deny it, ignore it, or hide it. Then people will realize that the end of the world has come. Then they will realize that their pastors and priests have lied to them. Then they will hate the harlot, and as a result, burn her. So we want to find out when the verse that describes the last worry-free days ends, and when her day of plagues can be expected. How long is K1 in the constellation of the seated Queen of Heaven? Interestingly, K1 will be in the constellation of the seated Queen until the evening of December 15. So from December 1 to December 15 or 16. Now we know the countdown of the remaining worry-free days of the Queen of Heaven. From December 16 onward, We must therefore expect the outpouring of her plagues on her day. And that will be the subject of Brother John's next video. This time frame falls directly into the larger time frame of the third hour of the fall of Babylon, which began on November 20. 7 days before all telescopes are pointed at Three-Eye Atlas. And we already know December 15 and 16 from one of the last videos as well. It is the moment when the second candlestick, as Virgo, also stands on her feet. You see, today we are coming from a completely different angle than in previous videos, following a completely different approach, and we end up at the same important dates. And we must not forget that no human being, and also no Satan and his demons, can change anything in the second heaven. They cannot influence the heavenly actors. So we can summarize that we can expect the true midnight cry at the earliest from December 1 onward, when the virgins will gradually recognize who has come with Three-Eye Atlas, and from December 16 onward, which is also the cornerstone laying day, followed by the 5 days of the Hanukkah feast, things will become more than uncomfortable for Babylon, because the wrath of God can no longer be held back much longer. What is the reason for the fall of Babylon? It is likely that the Christians who have looked upward and the Christians who did not believe what Rome says will suddenly cry out, "The bridegroom is coming." According to this study, this is the time period of the midnight cry. In the same time period when the midnight cry sounds, such an escalation of things could occur that we might have a nuclear war in Europe. At the same time, the believers who look upward know that our redemption is near, and they call out in the midnight cry, "The bridegroom is coming." Fear and dread will spread. All people, even those who don't even read the news, will know what is happening on the earth and in the heavens. In this time, we must have hope that Jesus will redeem us very quickly. What comes next for Satan when K1 leaves the seated queen on December 15? If we zoom in here again, then we get this view. From this side, the comet K1 comes out of the Queen of Heaven and moves into the constellation of Andromeda. The comet remains in Andromeda until January 18, 2026, and something immediately catches our attention: the chain we see at her hand. Because when we see the chain, and already know the path of K1, which comes from the serpent bearer and the serpent and goes through the Queen of Heaven, then we cannot help but investigate the capture of Satan, which must be the next event that follows. And we find that in Revelation 20. Let's read. "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season." The angel should be clear. It is K1 who activates Andromeda, and thus tells this story on the firmament. His path itself is like a chain around the dragon, as we already showed in a slide earlier. But of course, we also see the chain here, and that is more than interesting. But what is the bottomless pit? We have often explained that we have applied it to our black hole Sagittarius, a star, where nothing escapes. Well, good. But on the one hand, with K1, we are not near our black hole by the cross. And on the other hand, it would be unthinkable that the Father himself would cast Satan, meaning the dragon as the old serpent and as the devil, into his heart for 1,000 years, to express it very simply. But what is already clear is that we need a black hole for this verse. But which one? It must be the black hole of the Andromeda galaxy that K1 is pointing to. That must be the galactic prison for Satan, in which he will be bound for 1,000 years. Just so that one can imagine it a little, our black hole is about 4 million solar masses, while the black hole in the center of the Andromeda galaxy is about 100 million solar masses. So that is a high security prison for Satan. Of course, outside the holy city, far away from our Milky Way. Here we see the chain and the bottomless pit together. Here you see it again, slightly enlarged. That is the Andromeda galaxy. What is meant by this seal? On the one hand, we see here the circular and spiral-shaped path of K1, which one could interpret as a seal. But we have discovered something else that is very interesting. Namely, on January 18, 2016, when K1 leaves Andromeda and thus ends the activation of these verses. Yes, we are here on the Mazzaroth and directly in front of the head of Capricornus. For he stands for Satan on the Mazzaroth as the goat Azazel, who at the end of the Day of Atonement was brought into the wilderness by a man specifically appointed for that purpose. And there, Azazel, upon whom all the sins of the people had been placed, was thrown into the pit. This antitype must also be fulfilled at the end of the heavenly Day of Atonement. And here you see an unusual gathering of heavenly actors. The sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. I would say this really looks like a seal on the last day when K1 leaves Andromeda. And this seal is located directly above the head of Azazel. Whoever has not heard of Azazel may read more about it in Leviticus 16. But for completeness, we will read these 3 verses. And when he hath made an end of reconciling the holy place, and the tabernacle of the congregation, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat, and Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat, and confess over him all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions in all their sins, putting them upon the head of the goat, and shall send him away by the hand of a fit man into the wilderness. And the goat shall bear upon him all their iniquities unto a land not inhabited. And he shall let go the goat, in the wilderness. I think it has become clear by now what the uninhabited land is. It is not within the Milky Way, but far away, the black hole in the Andromeda galaxy. Whoever would like to read a bit more about this ritual on the Day of Atonement, appointed by God, may follow this link and read the slides there, especially starting from slide 50. If it should happen that such a man, prepared and set apart for this service, is really needed for the ultimate fulfillment of this antitype, then we can only ask that you include this man in your prayers, that he will truly be fit to guide Satan to Andromeda, and then afterward return safely to the Milky Way. I will say it again. Read through those slides. Then you will know that this journey was not fun at all. So much for the first topic of this video, where we looked at the verse of the seated queen and the imprisonment of Satan. Now we know where she is, who activates these verses, and in what time frame this one day of the fall of Babylon must take place within the culminating third hour. The second topic of this video is also a verse that we must examine more closely. It again concerns the harvest texts, but this time only a single verse that we now understand better. And you will see that this cutting of the grapes and filling of the winepress is perfectly represented on the firmament within the already known time period. The grape harvest culminates in the treading of the winepress of all nations. Everyone who is not saved will die on this earth. When we see these texts perfectly fulfilled on the firmament, then we know that Jesus truly comes to save us before the winepress is trodden. When we see through an actor in the heavens how the sickle is laid to the earth, and how the winepress is already filling, then we know that the treading of the winepress will take place afterward, and that the end of the world has come. These two videos form the foundation for today's update on the grape harvest. Whoever has not seen them yet, please absolutely catch up. I will no longer explain everything today, because those videos are already published for that purpose. In them, we were able to define rough time periods when the call of the harvest could be given, and from when the cutting and filling of the winepress might take place, as you can see here. Which verse are we talking about that we will focus on today? And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. This is the grape harvest sickle. It was fully depicted on June 21, 2025. That means that from that date onward, the grape harvest could have begun. But we are not sure whether it has already begun. What suddenly happened in June? At that time, we received the first photos of Three-Eye Atlas at the cross on the other side of the galactic equator. We saw a grape harvest sickle ready, and Jesus finishing his ministry in heaven, because we suddenly saw Three-Eye Atlas as the censer that was cast toward the earth. All of this is in harmony with the heavenly canvas and the Bible verses. We saw that the intercession was at least in its final stages. In a recent sermon, we showed where the winepress is depicted in the heavens. We have already perfectly identified the winepress, but what we did not yet have was an activation of the winepress. The winepress is always there. There are fixed stars that form the tail of the scorpion. We have the feet of Jesus there. They are, so to speak, there since the year AD 31. But the winepress has so far not been activated by a moving object. There are open questions. How do we get from Orion with the sickle to the earth, for example? Where is the earth in this context at all? Do we see the grapes on the vine? How is the winepress activated? How is the treading indicated? Whoever has already seen Brother John's last video already knows some answers from it. Whoever has not seen it will be amazed how the Lord does this on the firmament. We know where the winepress is that Jesus treads, right here. And now look at the path of this comet. It travels through the head of the serpent and through the evil serpent bearer, and goes directly into and through the winepress. And this comet also goes directly to the feet of Jesus at the cross, who treads the winepress alone. That is extremely striking, and therefore we must review the path of this actor in combination with the grape harvest texts, again, to see whether we obtain a more complete picture. Which comet is this? Here is again the already known table of the 7 current comets that have either their perihelion or their closest point to Earth in the last months of this year. We are not considering the 2 periodic comets, but only the actors that come from far away, unexpectedly. We want to know whether there is a comet that is near or in the winepress around December 19. And there we find only one that we have not yet considered. C 2025 A6. By the way, this is a very well-known comet, flaring brightly for quite some time and seen everywhere in the press. Let's look at the data. The comet was discovered on January 3, 2025. On the well-known October 21, that is, at the beginning of the second hour of the fall of Babylon, was its closest point to Earth, and it reached its perihelion on November 8. And on December 19, it is in Scorpius. Keep these dates in mind, please. Let's now look more closely at the path of this comet. Here is the entire path of C 2025 A6. Our question is how the harvest sickle of Orion, which was fully drawn in June, thrusts itself on the earth somewhere, and how we see the grapes being thrown into the winepress. First, we notice that we see a total of 3 sickles that are somehow near the path of A6. The grape harvest sickle of Orion, the sickle that Pollux is holding in his hand, and the sickle that Bootes, the bear keeper in German, who is a shepherd like Jesus, is holding. And when we think of the verse that the sickle is thrust into the earth, then we must logically examine where A6 had its closest point to earth. From the previous table, we know that it was October 21, and A6 was on that date exactly here in Bootes. That is in the shepherd holding a sickle. Wow, I would say. That is more than fitting. Could that be the beginning of the cutting of the grapes, as we had already correctly assumed at the beginning of the second hour of the countdown to the fall of Babylon in the previously shown harvest videos? Did something happen around October 21 that would show us either the spiritual or physical death of people who would go into the winepress? What happened around October 21? It was the beginning of the second hour of the fall of Babylon. In the USA, social tension is currently increasing further, and uprisings are breaking out across the country against Donald Trump. Already toward the end of the first hour, we saw the massive No Kings protests. But what is behind this? Why are millions of people in the USA, but also in Europe, all the way to Berlin, out on the streets? The masses fear a dictatorship, while at the same time, the ICE raids and deportation policies fuel further unrest. Many believe they are fighting for something good and still turn to violence, weapons, stones, arson, destruction. But whoever uses violence does not stand on the side of the army of Jesus Christ. The population is being driven nationwide toward a civil war. What would be the consequence? A divided country becomes vulnerable. An army that separates itself from the commander-in-chief. Christians standing against each other. Political camps arming themselves. Such an America can no longer guarantee its own defense. Behind all these developments stands ultimately only one single power, Satan, who stirs up the masses to war. A civil war in the USA comes dangerously close to the outbreak of a third world war with nuclear weapons, because the enemies of the USA would exploit the moment of weakness. Later in the video, we will return to far more insidious attacks of the enemy. And many Christians and Protestants have already fallen because of this and will still perish. For the sake of completeness, the perihelion should be mentioned once more. It falls on November 8 and lies directly in the serpent bearer. We will later see what Ophiuchus has to do with the grapes. But the serpent bearer commonly stands for the papacy, meaning for the harlot Babylon. And in Revelation 18, we read that Babylon has become a dwelling place of all unclean birds. That is, of course, an undeniable indication that A6 is pointing to the verse in Revelation 19, where the call goes out to the birds of the heavens to prepare themselves for the great supper of God. As the video progresses, it will become even clearer that it must be this moment and this actor. When, then, would A6 activate the winepress? Now we come to the most important part. When does A6 activate the winepress? When does it cross this upper line that symbolizes the lid of the winepress? That would indicate when the winepress is filled all the way to the top. This takes place exactly on December 21, at about 5 p.m., shortly before sunset on that day. This moment points to a very significant date in the prophetic timeline. You remember that from December 17 to December 21, we have the 5 days of Hanukkah, when we expect the symbolic entering of the 5 wise virgins during these 5 days. That A6 would point exactly to this date is already exceedingly astonishing. Now, with comet A6, we have for the first time a fairly precise and prominent activator of this wine press. More precisely, here the lid is activated. We must look carefully at what God wants to show. Whoever has already watched Brother John's last video, the proclamation of the day and the hour, already knows what A6 also indicates. By December 21 at the latest, the wine press is filled up to the rim of the wine press, where the lid is drawn with this blue line. But the treading takes place a little later, namely when A6 is at the feet of Jesus. For we know Jesus treads the winepress alone after the holy city has departed. Let's check when A6 is at the feet. That is, as already known, January 3, 2026, only about 2 weeks later, when A6 indicates that the winepress will be trodden by the feet of Jesus. That is quite impressive. Incidentally, on the same day, exactly 1 year earlier, A6 was first discovered in Gemini. That means that on December 21, the door of grace closes, because it is clear who has been thrown into the winepress, which is then full to overflowing. In parallel, during the well-known 5 days of Hanukkah, from December 17 to December 21, the 5 wise bridesmaids have entered, as the parable says. And then the 5 foolish virgins will stand before the closed door. By then it is clear whom the Lord knows and whom he does not. And the treading begins on January 3. And that means that the general resurrection and the ascension will also have taken place by January 3, 2026 at the latest. But this roughly 2-week additional waiting between the entering of the bridesmaids and the ascension or the wedding feast is no problem at all, because the 70th Jubilee year ends only in March or April 2026 anyway. Verse 19 represents the completed cutting and filling, and must therefore be completed here. And verse 20 is the treading after the departure of the saints, which will be fulfilled from here on. It is obvious that the heavens indicate exactly this. And I repeat again that the Father has made known this date of the return of Jesus, just as all Christianity has been expecting. Brother John has already presented it perfectly in his last video, the proclamation of the day and the hour. Please subscribe to our Telegram channels so that you do not miss these updates. A6 has therefore given us very specific dates for the last 2 verses of the grape harvest texts, namely when the sickle is applied to the harvest, when the winepress is full, and when it will be trodden. Let's still check the other verses that stand at the beginning of the grape harvest texts. The comet C 2025 A6 Lemon was discovered on January 3 of this year in the constellation Gemini, the constellation of the 2 witnesses. Now observe the curve that the path of A6 makes in the following months. You can already see in the right picture the path of another familiar comet coming from the club of Orion. It is the grape harvest sickle formed by the comet K2. I've listed the constellations through which A6 travels: Gemini, Lynx, Ursa Major, Canis Venatici, And then we come to the constellation that I showed earlier, when on October 21, it came to its closest point, to the herdsman. Let's read the two verses that we still want to verify. And another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. That is the command to harvest. This command can only be given when the grape harvest sickle is fully drawn. The harvest angel for the grape harvest is again Orion, as we already know, but this time the sun comes out of her tent or tabernacle on June 21. And the sun stands for the bridegroom, who has set himself forth in righteousness. And Three-Eye Atlas appeared on the other side of the galactic equator at the cross as the censer that was thrown by our heavenly high priest, as already explained in the harvest video. This comet angel has power over the fire. This is that dialogue, and nothing new so far. But today, thanks to comet A6, we can add something more. This K2 sickle that Orion has must somehow be applied to the earth. We already know the point in the herdsman, but how does it get there? With A6. And here, only 3 days after the solstice, on June 24, you see the handover of the sickle to A6. And 1 day later, we have the first photo of Three-Eye Atlas. In the picture, you see the comet A6 Lemon with its path through Gemini. But what is incredible and was not discovered before is that we have a Sun-Jupiter conjunction directly on A6. And with that, this handover of the sickle and the bringing to the earth is activated. Before, we could not understand how this sickle was sent to Jesus on the other side of the galactic equator toward the winepress for the grape harvest. That is what we could not connect. We did not have this path of A6. So everything is very clearly connected. It's a huge living picture that is displayed in heaven, a so-called moving sign. I think that now our rough interpretation at the time of the grape harvest texts in the video, The Harvest at the End of Time, has been magnificently confirmed by A6. Now we can directly see the handing over of the sickle from Orion to A6, who carries out the sending all the way to the herdsman. There, the closest point to Earth is indicated, and our original assumption is confirmed as to where the cutting and filling began. And finally, A6 explains in detail when the winepress is full. And A6 has us also slightly corrected by about 2 weeks, when the treading of the winepress, and thus the ascension, will take place. So far, that is, in my view, the extremely compelling and final update to the harvest at the end of time. In conclusion, we now come to the famous enemies of Jesus. Comet A6, of course, also points especially to the enemies of Jesus. Let's first read the corresponding Bible text. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. Don't forget, Satan himself is not thrown into the lake of fire at first, but into the bottomless pit, which we have already identified as the huge black hole of the Andromeda galaxy. But in this verse, it's about the beast and the false prophet at the end of time. In the image, you can see the path of A6. It goes through the head of the serpent and essentially cuts it off, as it seems. Then it passes through the entire constellation of the serpent bearer, Ophiuchus. Then it comes to the constellation of the beast, Scorpius, and finally even crosses the winepress. It depicts the casting of the enemies of Jesus into the winepress. What is the constellation of the beast? It is, of course, the scorpion, as already mentioned many times. What is the false prophet in this context? When you move through this region with A6, the only false prophet the path points to is the serpent bearer, Ophiuchus. He is a false prophet. He holds the serpent of false prophesying in his hand. It even coils around him. And this will later be very important. The papacy and many teachings connected with it are a terrible deception for the people. We have already reported extensively about that. Just earlier, we spoke about the veneration and worship of Mary. Don't forget the change of the Ten Commandments as Moses received them. Where are those two thrown, as the path of A6 indicates? Into the winepress. What then is the winepress? Also the lake of fire. When the winepress is activated, something is activated on earth that resembles a lake of fire. What could that be? A supervolcano, for example? We have several candidates, especially in Italy. Campi Flegrei, for example, a supervolcano that could plunge the whole earth into disaster. And it lies largely under the ocean. So it could be a lake of fire. That is one possibility. And it would devastate Italy, Europe, and all the regions there. Its eruption would then cause a nuclear-like wind across the entire earth. We will soon see what it really is. To summarize, by associating the beast, as always, with the scorpion, we find that the false prophet must be Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer, who usually stands for the Pope of Rome. This perfectly fulfills the verse from Revelation 19, verse 20. The lake of fire is then the same winepress of the grape harvest. However, with the additional understanding that we are mainly speaking about Europe, since the Pope has his seat in the Vatican, and the beast, with the 10 horns and the 7 heads, refers to the G7 and the 10 European nations into which the Roman Empire fell apart. These will also be the ones who, according to Revelation 17, will burn the harlot with fire. What about the grapes in the last harvest? We now have the Pope, and we have, let's say, the European Union. They will be thrown into the lake of fire. But is that all? Or is there still an end indicated for someone else? Are we not taught that during the millennium, all who remain on earth will be dead? Who are these? And we have not yet considered the verses for the serpent, which A6 also points to. Something else is thrown into the winepress. The lake of fire refers to the lake of fire verse in Revelation 19. The winepress verse in Revelation 14 speaks of grapes. The two places are obviously the same here, but the filling is different. What are the grapes? What about the old serpent that is carried by the popes? How could that represent the grapes? There are two classes of people on earth. The earliest prophecy against the serpent in the Garden of Eden says, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." That is one of the earliest prophecies of Jesus Christ regarding the end. It took only 3 chapters before God spoke clearly about the end. Jesus spoke to the serpent in the Garden of Eden. "There will be enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed." So between the two lines of descendants. It's about good and evil. This prophecy is still ongoing. This bruising of the heel that the serpent inflicted occurred when Jesus, as the good seed of the good woman, died on the cross. He was stung in the heel by the scorpion, the beast. What is still missing according to the verse? The crushing of the serpent's head. That is what we are still waiting for. But now we see how the head of the serpent is chopped off and transported toward the winepress by the path of comet A6. All who belong to the seed of the serpent form the bad grapes of the grape harvest. I will show this very clearly, that this is so. What is the vine? What are the grapes wrapped around? Here we return once more to the grape harvest verses that A6 tells. Let's read. "And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God." That is the correct wording. It does not say grapes. The word grapes in this verse, in the King James Version and other translations, is not mentioned. It says vine. What does vine mean in the Strong's Concordance? It is something that is coiling about a support. A serpent also coils like a vine or a branch around its victim. A vine is a climbing plant, as you know. And why does this verse not point, for example, to the much larger water serpent, Hydra, on the Mazzaroth, but to this serpent? Very simple. A6 proves it. A6 passes directly through the head of this serpent in the correct frame. So the vine normally winds itself around poles. What is the support of this winding vine? Who supports the serpent? Ophiuchus, called the serpent bearer in German. The word itself already says it. It's the popes around whom the vine of Satan winds. It is clearly visible here in the firmament, in the grape harvest story. These are all who follow the seed of the serpent. All mRNA vaccinated people, for example. All who follow the idolatry of the Catholic religion. All who say, wow, the Pope is so kind. He did exactly the right thing. And now we even have an American Pope. All who now keep Sunday because the Pope says it is Sunday, the day of rest. All followers of the now united religions of the earth in the ecumenical movement. We have, in effect, a global religion. Think of the Pope's invitation in 1986 to the joint prayer meeting of Assisi. And everyone who went there and now supports the current ecumenical movement belongs to the seed of the serpent. On October 28, the Pope led an ecumenical meeting at the Vatican. I mention this only as an example. There are supposedly 32,000 Protestant denominations in the world. They follow the one support of the serpent. They are all poisoned by this venom. All who pray to Mary stand on the wrong side. Please warn and teach these people not to venerate Mary. There's only one name, according to the personal words of Jesus. There's only one name given to humanity that can save, the name of Jesus Christ himself. There is a great deception. Jesus prophesied it in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. When he was asked about the end of the world, he warned about one thing. See to it that no one deceives you. Deception was the weapon of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. If you eat of this fruit, you will never die. Instead, you will be like God. Look how beautiful I am. Don't you want to be as beautiful as I am and have the wisdom of God? Then eat. That was a great deception. Satan disguised himself as a serpent. But the serpent was not an ugly creature. No, it only became that when God later cursed it. Before that, the serpent was a type of bird, a beautiful paradise bird, one of the most beautiful and shimmering creatures one could behold. It was colorful and could fly. Eve was deceived by the beauty of this creature on the wonderfully attractive tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the wonderfully shining fruits. She was deceived and ate, and afterward God visited Adam and Eve shortly after this event. And the bird, the beautiful bird to look at, was cursed and became a serpent that from then on had to crawl on the ground. The vine is Satan, and the grapes on the branches are all who follow his teachings and deceptions. And the vine winds itself around Ophiuchus. You know that many of these climbing plants are very poisonous, even though they are beautiful to look at. That is the vine. Remember, we spoke about the bad grapes and not about the good wine, like at the wedding feast in Cana. We are definitely speaking about the grape blood, the blood of the enemies of Christ. The enemies of Christ are those who follow the teachings of his enemies. We are speaking about bad, poisonous, overripe grapes that are being thrown in here. And the vine, after the grapes are trodden, will be burned. How are Christians and the whole world deceived? Brother John already explained extensively in his last video, the proclamation of the day and the hour, what has been happening since September 21. He already very impressively pointed out a main trap for the dying of a third of all Christians. With this table, we simply want to point once more to the current threefold deception. No one should remain unwarned. For us, the question keeps coming up whether fire, smoke, and brimstone of the second woe should be applied literally or spiritually. In short, whether there will still be a physical disaster in the core period within the third culminating hour of the fall of Babylon, which began on November 20, we will see. But one thing is certain. Jesus warned urgently not to be deceived. So there must definitely be also a spiritual dying. Look here. Fire is definitely connected with false revival. In several videos, we've already pointed to the topic of Charlie Kirk, that this revival is not real. And Brother John has again spent some time in his last video highlighting the machinations surrounding it, which 1/3 of the Christians, especially Protestants, have fallen for. At least two key points must be mentioned here. Although Charlie Kirk emphasized the biblical Sabbath, all these supposedly revived Christians nevertheless overcrowded their Sunday churches. That has nothing to do with true revival, because that focuses, among other things, on the true commandments of God, including the fourth commandment. And the second is that this farewell ceremony of Mr. Kirk was anything but a solemn event, but rather a mega event where the entire U.S. cabinet and other political figures spoke and staged a huge spectacle on the world stage. Trump already made clear, and we highlighted this in one of our videos, that for him, the separation of church and state does not apply. And that is precisely the main goal of this false revival. And with that, Protestant America inevitably falls, because that is the main pillar on which this nation was built. What is the result? Whenever the separation between church and state falls, a terrible persecution follows. And this farewell ceremony, with which this false revival began, took place at the beginning of the first hour of the fall of Babylon, where the kings of the earth, that is, of the USA, lamented. Yes, that was a lamentation spectacle of the highest order, which the whole world saw when the U.S. kings and mighty ones lamented in front of the camera and even comforted Mrs. Kirk, somewhat lustfully. As said, please watch Brother John's last video, where he explained this point impressively and vividly. Incidentally, one hears basically only one thing. Charlie is in heaven with Jesus, meaning Charlie lives and helps from above to guide the affairs of Turning Point USA, etc., etc. That is pure spiritualism, because the Bible is clear. The dead know nothing and wait in the grave for the resurrection on the last day. How can it be that supposedly Protestant America is so trapped in spiritualism? A mega trap for anyone who believes this. Why should Jesus even return if people who die are already with him anyway? Why is a resurrection needed? The next trap, which may have passed unnoticed by many of you, is that King Charles traveled to the Pope on October 23 to pray with him. You have to understand that Charles is not only King of the United Kingdom, of Northern Ireland and other territories, including the Commonwealth. Furthermore, he is also defender of the faith. Yes, he is also the supreme worldly head of the Church of England. And since the English Reformation in the 16th century, England has had nothing to do with the papacy. The English Church has not been under the Pope for 500 years, and this breach was ended on October 23 through this modern walk to Canossa. I hope you know what the walk to Canossa means. As Tony Palmer, an Episcopal bishop in England, said not long ago, the protest is over. And that is indeed what has now come. It is no longer about doctrines, about teaching, but ecumenism is what matters. Everything back to the Mother Church. As we've said so many times, the wound of the papacy is healed, both in the old world with this outwardly powerful message from Leo and Charles, and also in the New World when Francis spoke before the UN and the US Congress. And Leo is now also the first American Pope. The unthinkable has happened. If you look at the lamenting in the second hour of the fall of Babylon, then these are the merchants. How fitting that the Commonwealth, as the name already says, is probably the oldest trading community we know, and King Charles is the head of it, the one who, standing on behalf of the most powerful king of Europe, had to pilgrimage to Rome. I would say a perfect hit with an equally perfectly fatal trap into which many Christians and Protestants will fall. So, and on the third deception front, the earthly 14th lion himself is fighting. He delivered the likewise unthinkable on November 4. Until now, Mary, the mother of Jesus, had been given the role of co-redemptrix and mediatrix, and was therefore also worshipped and venerated. Although she, just like Charlie Kirk, simply rests in the grave until Jesus will raise both of them, and many of the redeemed on January 3. And this veneration of Mary was and is an absolute no-go for true Protestants. That is a huge reason for separation. But on November 4, the unthinkable happened. Pope Leo decided that Mary is no longer co-redemptrix and mediatrix. Bombshell. And just like that, one of the greatest barriers has fallen. Protestants now have a huge reason to no longer resist returning to Rome. Leo is indeed a very cunning lion who is a pillar for Satan, trying to devour as many as possible by letting the dividing barriers fall. And do you know which barrier also fell? Pope Leo has for some time now made it unmistakably clear that there are only two genders, male and female, and that is also what true marriage means. Bombshell number 2. Another barrier has fallen. What then stops the blind leaders of the churches from leading their even blinder sheep back to Rome? nothing anymore, or better said, almost nothing anymore. By the way, look at the third hour. There the shipmasters or captains lament. Is it not so that people speak of church ships? Yes, and the leaders of the churches are the captains of the church ships. The captain of the mother church has just taken huge steps and has steered his church ship toward the Protestants, or opened it for them. Many will fall and will see in Leo the most beloved, best, and most unifying pope of all time, and will go to ruin in the process. Yes, one thing is still missing. The Sabbath that has been highlighted since Charlie Kirk's death. It's still about the Sabbath Sunday question, the mark of the beast. But as we see, people are running into their Sunday churches instead of accepting the biblical Sabbath and fleeing from Babylon. And here, the final conflict will be decided. Wise or foolish? And Leo and Donald are both fighting on the same side to bring the protest down once and for all. Who is awake enough to smell the sulfurous, smoky, and burning roast and not bite into this bait? At the end, I have tried to complete our familiar timeline with the information we have worked out. In a previous video, we reconsidered the timelines of the two witnesses from the perspective of the cross witness. And here you see the end of the 1,335 days, and exactly on this October 21, it was quietly announced that from November 27 onward, Three-Eye Atlas must be observed with all telescopes. After that, you see the process where the breath of life from God enters the two lampstand points, in Pisces and in Virgo, followed by the process of standing on their feet. On December 21, the loud call at the cross comes, "Come up hither." And the next part in the verse must then logically take place on the newly discovered and Father-proclaimed January 3, where they ascend in a cloud. Brother John already presented this in the last video, the proclamation of the day and the hour. In green, you see the events shown by comet K1, which remains for these 15 days in the seated queen. That is why I highlighted this bar here, because it looks as if this marks the last days without worries for the heavenly queen. In this time, within the third hour of the fall of Babylon, the true midnight cry could also take place, because from November 27 onward, all telescopes will be pointed at Three-Eye Atlas. Then corresponding information about the nature of this special object will hopefully finally be made known. However it may be, please keep your eyes open and observe. On December 15 to 16, K1 then moves into the constellation Andromeda, and the outpouring of the plagues over Babylon must be expected. And after that, also the imprisonment of Satan will occur. Remember his prison in the black hole of Andromeda. Then I added a yellow timeline with the key dates of comet C 2025-A6 regarding the grape harvest. You see the sickle handoff here at the top. Then remember the closest approach on October 21, where the harvest sickle was thrust into the earth in Bootes. Shortly after, on November 8th, A6 was at perihelion in Ophiuchus. And after we've just seen the enemy's threefold plan of attack with fire, smoke, and brimstone, where Pope Leo shortly before, on November 4, abolished the separating Marian doctrine, it makes sense to see here the angel in Revelation 19, who stands in the sun and calls to the great supper of the birds. The threefold deceptions will claim their victims, and unfortunately, many bad grapes will be thrown into the winepress. Here, the winepress, or the winepress lid, is activated, and here in dark blue is January 3, 2026, where we now expect the trampling of the winepress shown by A6, and thus the ascension. After the 5 days of the entering of the wise virgins, the closing of the door of grace takes place on December 21. God's children will then enter, or will have entered their chambers, because the unmixed wrath of God will be poured out. And by then, the second woe must also be over, because then it will be clear who belongs to the foolish virgins. Then it will be clear who did not survive the treacherous fire, smoke, and poison brimstone attack. Be careful, dear viewers. Not much time for repentance remains. What else can I say except, please wake up and make your decision now. If you have not done it yet, leave Babylon today. What are you waiting for? On the left, you see the vine of the false teachings of Satan, winding itself up on the papacy. After this video, it should be clear what the fate of these grapes is. On the right, however, you see the wedding feast in heaven, about which Jesus himself said at the Last Supper on earth, "But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine, until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Where will you be found? Which wine is the better one? God be with you. Amen.